I'm Riley Reese. This is the Sophia Unfiltered podcast where we bring together thought leaders, wellness entrepreneurs, makers, and emerging health leaders. We're here to have raw, unfiltered conversations because sharing your stories has the power to change lives, help others heal, and transform the way we take care of ourselves. Here we go. So to help us learn about sleep and how to optimize our performance, we have a special guest and the author of Sleep to Win, How Navy SEALs and Other High Performers Stay on Top. Dr. Parsley, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Do you want to tell all of our listeners who may not know your story a little bit about you and your background? I think it's super fascinating.
Yeah. So I grew up in kind of rural Texas, joined the military in high school. I dropped out of high school to join the military. I wanted to do the toughest training in the world, which I'd only learned about like a month before I decided to join. Some documentary came out about Navy SEALs being the toughest training in the world. And I was like, oh, I want to do that. So I went down and joined the Navy, went into boot camp. And, back in those days, you couldn't go straight to the SEAL pipeline. You had to go get a job in the Navy because you're most likely going to fail. And like 90% of people fail. So they have to have a place to send you. And so I went through all of that. And then I went through SEAL training, obviously made it through SEAL training to West Coast SEAL Team 5. Did 3 deployments there. It was kind of all, military police work around the world. We had the first Gulf War, but that was kind of, a nothing burger. I think 4 or 5 bullets got shot during that. And so I'd fallen in love. I was going to get married and have kids and stuff. So I figured, I'll go do something else. Thought I might go to physical therapy school. So I started volunteering at San Diego Sports Medicine Center because you need 2,000 hours to volunteer, or you need 2,000 hours of volunteer work to apply for PT school. I don't know if you know that. That's a crazy amount of volunteer hours. So I went to do that and quickly decided I didn't want to do that, but worked, it was a healthcare mecca. We had every kind of healthcare provider there you could imagine. And some of the doctors there, tried to talk me into going to medical school. And I was like, pump the brakes there, Sparky. I didn't even graduate high school. Like, let's be realistic, But anyway, I decided to go to medical school. Didn't really have any interest in going back into the military. But when I started applying for medical schools, I realized that the military had their own medical school and that they would pay me to go to medical school instead of the other way around. And I was already married. I already had a kid, another kid on the way. So it made sense. And I figured I'll get to go back to the SEAL teams, give back to the community that, shaped me as who I am. And when I got back to the SEAL teams as the doctor there, I was very well steeped in sports medicine and my career path was orthopedics. And so I went there fully expecting I was going to do a bunch of sports medicine and orthopedics. And, I got there at a time where we were developing this sports rehab facility and we hired all these experts from all over the world. And we had everything. We had ortho rounds coming through and pain rounds coming through, and we had PTs and ATCs and strength and conditioning coaches and exercise physiologists and nutrition. We had everything. So then I was the dumbest guy in the round. And rather what they do when you're the dumbest guy around, they put you in charge. And they said, okay, so now you supervise everybody, whatever that's supposed to mean. And I'm like, okay, I'll supervise. And so I kind of sat in my office with not much to do. And SEALs are a lot like professional athletes, and that the worst thing you can do for them is to put them on the bench. Like they'll do anything to not be taken out of their job. And so they usually just lie to their doctor because their doctor is like the number one threat, the number one person who's going to put them on the bench. And so fortunately, I'd been a SEAL, which gave me credibility. And I'd been a SEAL recently enough to where there were still a lot of SEALs there that I had trained with and deployed with. And so I obviously had a good enough reputation for people to trust me. And they came in and kind of closed the door behind them and said, hey, just between you and me, let me tell you what's really going on. And there was this whole litany of performance issues. And I was a Western trained physician. So I knew how to recognize and diagnose and treat diseases. They didn't have any diseases. They just weren't performing as well as they would like to perform. So they're complaining about things like body composition shifts and getting weaker and slower and fatter and decreased motivation, decreased ability to sleep, decreased sex drive, decreased sexual performance, decreased concentration at work, mental focus, clarity, all that type of very subjective things. And I had no idea how to help them. I was just like, I just took copious notes and just let them talk and asked them a bunch of questions. And I sent them to the lab to test everything I could possibly think about them testing. And, as you can well imagine, the bureaucracy of the military didn't really dig my plan. I got cracked down on a lot for, overutilizing assets and whatever, practicing outside my scope, whatever, you name it. And I'm embarrassed to admit how many people it took. I mean, it's probably 30 or 40 guys that sat in my office. The day it hit me, one guy said something about taking Ambien. And I thought, seems like a lot of people say they took Ambien. So I put a little note in the margin. And after he left, I went back through my shadow files, and every single person who had been in my office was taking Ambien. And I thought, I wonder if that could be, like I went to medical school. I didn't have a single class on sleep. So I knew nothing about sleep. I knew what Ambien was because I took pharmacology. I knew it acted like GABA. I didn't really know what GABA had to do with sleep, but I knew Ambien acted like GABA. So that was where I was starting from. And then as I learned more about what goes on while you're sleeping, what should be going on, what doesn't happen when you don't sleep well, sleep enough, or if you sleep under the influence of drugs or alcohol, then I thought, well, actually every single thing they've talked to me about could be explained by Ambien, by them taking Ambien. And I mean, I wasn't naive enough to think that would be everything, but it could explain any symptom they had. So I said, well, that seems like the biggest lever to move. Let's do that. So I came up with a concoction of supplements and just gave them a handout, and they went out and bought them all. And I got everybody off of Ambien. And when I got them off of Ambien, lo and behold, all their lab markers that I was tracking, so things like testosterone and insulin sensitivity and, all the hormones, thyroid functions, and then oxidation, inflammation, things like that, like everything sort of negative that looked bad in their labs would improve rapidly. So their total testosterone would triple, their free testosterone would quadruple, their fasting insulin would be cut in half, their fasting blood glucose would go down 20 or 30%, thyroid function would improve, inflammation would go way down from like dangerously high level to unmeasurable, because they were young, healthy, athletic guys already. So they should have had these labs to begin with. And so that was kind of the beginning of it. And then we lectured, we'd bring the teams together before and after they deployed, pre and post deployment kind of retreats, and do lectures and things. And we'd bring in motivating speakers, not motivational speakers, but, speakers that people were interested in. It's like Colonel Grossman on killing, or like Rob Wolf would come and talk about nutrition, or, whatever, New York Times bestselling authors, kind of professional speakers and so forth. And then I got to share the stage with those guys because the Navy had me for free. So I did all the symposiums, obviously, because it didn't cost them a dime for me to be there. And I just talked to all the SEALs about how sleep how sleep can affect your hormones. And they know what testosterone is, they know what growth hormone is, they know what insulin is, they know what inflammation is. And when you just break it down for them, how their sleep choices are causing them to have lower testosterone, lower anabolic functions, and higher catabolic functions, they snap to pretty quickly. And I was kind of the only person talking about sleep as a performance tool in those days. And that led like all the other professional speakers to bringing me on their podcast, inviting me to other symposiums, to do lecture, other stages and so forth. And, what I really do professionally is I'm a performance enhancement physician. So I don't care what your goals are. I help people perform better. And that can be mental, cognitive, physical, it can be strength, speed, endurance, whatever. I like body, lose fat. It doesn't matter. Whatever it is you want to do, I help people do that. But the foundation of all that is sleep. And because that's how I kind of got introduced to the world, I'm now the sleep guy. And that's how people usually, my name gets mentioned. They go, oh, the sleep guy. I'm like, yeah, that's me. Whatever. You just got to accept the labels you're given at some point. Like, all right, that's who I am. I'm a sleep guy.
That's an amazing story. And, I was in the Air Force, and that's obviously terrifying because, as a pilot, they would give us the ability to, I was ground testing Ambien, and I never took it, but because of our, I know you mentioned the transcontinental pilots, I'm one of those as well, but, we have these long runs and they give you Ambien so you could turn off and go down. I hate taking anything that's going to make you feel like that. So I never did it. But to know that it's going to cause all of those side effects is terrifying. It's terrifying that they would let anybody of these high levels take any kind of drug like that. It's terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, it was thought to be completely benign. Medicine, I think everybody has now in the last few years seen how political medicine can be. But there's definitely ebbs and flows of medications, and they will, whether it's pharma top down or physicians looking for solutions bottom up. I don't know, I'm sure it varies, but if at any given time there's a consensus, well, this drug is totally benign and it only has good things, and you can give it give it willy nilly and it'll be fine because it's only good. Of course, that's never true. I mean, there's a cost for everything. There's a cost for everything you do. Everything you put in your mouth has a cost. It's like, so when Ambien first came out, it was an alternative to the benzodiazepines, things like Valium and Xanax, right? And the big problem with those is that they were addictive, and you developed sort of what we call tachyphylaxis, so like sort of a resistance to it, where you needed higher and higher dosages, but at a high enough dosage, Ambien and I'm not saying Ambien, like Valium and Xanax and things like that will actually depress your breathing and you can die from it. And so, these new drugs, these Z drugs, like Ambien and Lunesta, these were the magic drugs that didn't have the dependency. So there was nothing wrong with them. You could use them free will. And, the problem with the pharmaceutical industry is when they research a drug and then they put in an application with the FDA, they own all the research. So every bit of research that's been done has been funded by them. They own it. They only give the FDA what they want to give the FDA. They don't have to give them everything, which is how, we got caught up in that big mess with the Pfizer vaccine. So, when they get sued in discovery, they have to show all the research. And so that had fortunately happened right around the time this was happening, right around the time the SEALs started coming to talk to me. So it's 2009. And what I learned was that Ambien decreases REM sleep by about 80%. And if you want, we can get into the difference between REM sleep and deep sleep, because different times of sleep do different things for you. But REM sleep is decreased by 80%, and deep sleep is reduced by about 20% when you take Ambien, the Z drug. If you use alcohol, the exact opposite happens. 80% of deep sleep goes away, 20% of REM. So if you use both, which is what everybody does, and if SEALs, 2 is 1 is none. If 2 is great, 3 is better. So who knows how many they're taking, 2, 3 times the recommended dosage, chasing that down with alcohol. So now you have 80% of your REM sleep decreased by Ambien, 20% of it decreased by alcohol, the opposite on the deep sleep. So I do a sleep study on them, and their sleep study comes back 99.999% stage 2 sleep, which means they didn't get any measurable deep sleep and they didn't get any measurable REM sleep. And I'll be the first to admit, when you really learn about sleep and what goes on when you sleep and like the sleep architecture, what's going on and why things are happening, why you're sleeping, what happens when you don't sleep well, I can't explain to you how they survived it. I mean, because they'd been doing this for years. It wasn't like it didn't just start when I was there, right? So this kind of started at the beginning of the combat with all the combat deployments, shifting time zones, and all that stuff. So it'd been going on 8 or 9 years by the time I got there, and they should have all been dead. I can't explain that. Just the body's more resilient than we give it credit for, and there's all sorts of mechanisms going on that we don't understand yet. But once you learn what happens when you go to sleep, it makes perfect sense why all their symptoms were what they were. And subjectively, I don't think I mentioned that, but subjectively, everything they complained about got better. It didn't get 100% better, and it wasn't 100% of people and 100%, but I mean, I would say it was an 80% solution for 80% of the people, and then it was 100% solution for a lot of guys. But it was very powerful, and the traumatic brain injury was kind of the other missing component that I hadn't quite figured out. I figured that out about a year and a half before I left. So that was the other component, because that also affects your hormones and your brain function, and your brain obviously is kind of the maestro of the whole body, and it's coordinating all the organs, and all the every kind of rhythm in your body is coordinated by the brain.
I think you kind of answered the question I was going to ask, but it's kind of a two-part question. The first one being, is Ambien sleep better than no sleep? And could you use it on a once in a while basis, or is it better just to kind of ride the struggle bus all night and not sleep without Ambien? And then secondly, tell us a little bit about the stages of sleep and what each one does, and what a typical, a refreshing, good, healthy night's sleep would look like.
Sure. What the research what the totality of the research showed once they were sued, Ambien helps you fall asleep 13 minutes faster, and you will sleep a total of 37 minutes longer on average. Now, because you're decreasing REM sleep by 80% and deep sleep by 20%, it's a net loss, because that extra 37 minutes is nothing compared to all of the quality of sleep that you've lost. So to answer your other question, if it's intermittently, so obviously I've dealt with a lot of grieving widows. Usually they can't sleep at all for the first couple of weeks. I will usually give them sleep drugs. I actually prefer the benzodiazepines. And if you're controlling how much you're giving them and you have an exit plan, like they're only going to use it for a week or two, I prefer that. And there's the reasons for that is because it's longer acting and it doesn't dissociate your brain as much. We'll talk about that in a little bit. After this, we probably should cover a little bit of sleep hygiene, and I'll explain what I'm talking about, what Ambien does to the brain that isn't as bad with benzos. But to answer your other question, sleep is basically divided up, and there's a lot of nomenclature for it because it's a scientific field and things changes all the time. But there's a reasonable way to look at it is just deep sleep and REM sleep. Deep sleep can also be called slow wave sleep. It can be stages 3 and 4 of sleep. It can be delta and theta of sleep. And it's just nomenclature. It all means the same thing. And so the stages 1 through 4 in sleep, and then there's REM. And so basically when you first get into bed, you have a little bit of dissociation. And I'll get into this right now. It just makes sense to cover right now. So really the definition of sleep is that there's a barrier between you and your environment, and you can be awakened past it. And then I've sort of on my own added to that definition. That was William Dement's, who's the grandfather of sleep medicine. That's his, and I kind of added to it. And there's predictable neuronal nerve patterns in your brain, because you can be unconscious. Well, you can't be awakened if you're unconscious, but I'll shut myself up. So there's a barrier between you and your environment. And if you think about it, as you're falling asleep, things seem a little different, right? You can hear things in the other room. You can see things. You can feel things. Obviously, all of your senses still work while you're asleep, which is why you can be woken up by stimulating, any of those senses, right? Like turn on a light, make a loud noise, shake you, whatever. You can be awakened by that because everything is still working. It's just what happens is that your brain's attention to that is going away, right? And when you quit paying attention to your environment, they say there's a barrier between you and your environment. So stage 1 sleep is kind of when that's a little different. And we've all been laying in bed and you can hear something in the other room and you just realize you're not processing it quite the normal way. It's like maybe you're blending with dreams or you're making some weird assessment of it or whatever. And then you'll fall down into what we call stage 2 sleep, which is also called transitional sleep. That's just kind of when a bunch of nerve bundles in your brain are kind of firing off and changing rhythms in your brain. And then you go down into slower and slower brainwave states. And then that's called deep sleep. Stages 3 and 4 is deep sleep. Deep sleep is the lowest stress hormones you will have at any 24-hour period of your life. So we've all heard of fight or flight, probably, right? And fight or flight is the maximum amount of stress hormones essentially that you'll secrete. So your body and your brain are essentially in panic. You're going to use every resource you have to get out of that environment, right? If there's somebody shooting at you, if you're in a car crash or you see a lion or a tiger, something like that, like you or someone you love is about to die or be seriously injured. If you don't get away from that. And so nothing else matters. Your body will use every resource you have to get away from that threat, because it doesn't matter if you can fight off infection. It doesn't matter if you can reproduce. It doesn't matter if you can digest the food in your stomach. It doesn't matter if you can do any of that stuff. If you don't get away from the tiger, you're dead. And so you use everything. And that makes you sort of superhuman. You're faster, you're stronger, you have more endurance, higher pain threshold, faster reflexes, you can see better, your lungs are more full, your blood glucose is up. And the reason we don't run around like that all the time is because we're eating ourselves as a fuel source, and we would die pretty quickly because we would just run out of all of our resources. So the exact opposite of that, and by the way, that's called catabolic state. And I'll cover that a little more in a second. And the opposite of that is anabolic. Think about anabolic steroids building muscles, right? The highest anabolic period, anabolic is a repair, right? So I'm taking small, simple things and I'm building big, complex things. So a simple example is amino acids. When I work out, my body needs to repair. and I'm going to repair tissue, especially if I've damaged myself, if I've been injured. I need amino acids to build the proteins to fix myself and to make my muscles bigger and stronger if I've overworked them. That's an anabolic process. I'm going to take those amino acids and I'm going to build a protein structure like a muscle. If I'm starving to death and my body needs amino acids, then I'm going to actually use my muscle as a form of amino acids, and I'm going to eat my own muscles and turn those into amino acids and to distribute that across my body. So that's catabolic. So those are opposite processes. Being awake is essentially catabolic and being asleep is anabolic. So I think most people realize when you go to the gym and you work out, you leave the gym weaker than you were when you arrived to the gym, right? If you've done anything worth doing, you should be weaker when you left. So how do you get stronger? Well, you get stronger because you go home and you sleep and you repair. And when you repair, let's say I've done strength work, right? And I've lifted more weights than my muscles are capable of lifting. And I've gone to the point of failure. I've done a complete eccentric contraction. I've actually ruptured muscle cells and I've damaged myself. When I go into deep sleep, my body is going to repair those muscles and it's going to use today as the template of what I did today as to what it assumes I need to be better at tomorrow. And so I'm going to repair in a way that allows me to be more likely to be able to lift that weight with less damage tomorrow. And that's how I get stronger. I get progressively stronger by doing that serially, right? So I do that over time. And every time I get like, a 0.1% stronger and and then that adds up over time. If you don't sleep, then you don't repair. And the same thing is going on with your brain, and the same thing is going on with every other organ. So it doesn't have to be exercised. Being awake, like I said, is catabolic. You're using up your resources. And so when you go into deep sleep, the first thing that happens is the structural cells in your brain that make the brain shape the way it is, those contract by about 30%. And they produce these little pathways for the cerebral spinal fluid to flow through, and it flushes out all the waste products. You can think of every cell as like a miniature version of you, right? You're awake and you're asleep. You have two different states. When you're awake and when you're asleep, you take in oxygen. You use oxygen as a fuel source. You produce CO2 as a waste product. You take in nutrients while you're awake. You're eating food. You produce waste products, right? And then you do work with those resources during the day, and then you have to repair at night and restore and replenish everything. Every cell in your body is doing that, including your brain cells, and all the waste products are building up in the brain. So when that lymphatic flow comes and you flush all that out, you get rid of a bunch of waste products in the brain. It clears the brain up to now start regenerating and sort of restocking the shelves, regenerating the resources you need for tomorrow. And like I said, the whole reason I'm going to go to sleep tonight is because I have to repair from everything I did to myself today. And then I have to prepare for tomorrow, assuming, and like I said, my brain and body are going to use today as the template for what it expects I need to do tomorrow. So when I go to sleep tonight, like I said, being awake is catabolic, being asleep is anabolic. It takes 8 hours to repair the catabolic activity. It takes about 8 hours to recover from being awake for 16 hours. And that's a contract you're born into. Doesn't matter how much butter you put in your coffee or how much red light you sit under, how many ice baths you do. Like that is you're born in that contract. You can't get out of it. It takes 8 hours to recover from being awake for 16 hours. Now, if I choose to sleep less, and if you think about it, if I repaired 100% and I replenished all my resources, I would wake up exactly the same every day, which means I would never get older, right? I would always be the same. Now, when we're young, we can actually do better than that, right? We can wake up bigger, taller, smarter, faster, and stronger. There's a plateau period about 25 to 30, 35, where it doesn't seem to change much. And then it kind of starts changing pretty quickly. The older you get, the less you can repair fully during the night. So if I choose to sleep 6 hours instead of 8 hours, not only am I choosing to sleep 25% less, I'm aging 25% faster, right? I'm giving up 25% of my repair and preparation for the next day. So I can't possibly be the best I can be, right? Because by definition, I could have been 25% better. And then after you come out of deep sleep, you go through REM sleep, and REM sleep is kind of the same thing that's going on for your body. Oh, let me back up. During the deep sleep is when you're going to secrete all of your testosterone, your growth hormone, your thyroid. You're balancing out. There's actually neurological regulation of your appetite and what's called your fuel partitioning. So tomorrow, not only how hungry you are, but what you crave and what your body does with the food that you eat tomorrow is determined by how well you sleep tonight. If you're sleep deprived, you can eat the same meal as if you're not sleep deprived. And the same meal when you're not sleep deprived might be a fairly anabolic meal that you're going to use the resources as you've taken them in. If you're starving or if you're sleep deprived, the only time any animal on this planet sleep deprives itself other than humans is if it's starving or if it's being preyed upon, it's being stalked. So it's reasonable to believe that our brains believe the same thing. And so when we're sleep deprived, our body is in us not fight or flight, but it's moving towards that, right? So we have higher stress hormones and our body's perceiving it as being a threat. So we're more likely to store what we eat as fat. We go from that deep anabolic sleep to REM sleep, and then REM sleep is kind of the same thing for the brain. During REM sleep, you will rehearse everything you've done that day, whether you realize it or not, whether you dream about it or not. You're going to think about everything you've thought. You're going to think about everything that you've heard me say. You're going to prune off information that you find superfluous, and you're going to reinforce information that you think is useful. And then the more things you can connect to that new piece of information, the more what we call durable that path is. So think of it like when it's first formed, it's like a rodent trail or something, and then it becomes a footpath, and it becomes like a hiking trail, then becomes like a sidewalk, then eventually it's a super highway. And that's information that you access all the time. You have really quick recall of it. And the more things you attach to that, the more angles you can come at that same piece of information. Now you actually know that information. You can work with it. It's not just something you've memorized. It's a concept that you understand that you can manipulate. Also, during REM sleep is when you emotionally categorize every single thing that's happened during that day. So if you've been in a fight with your spouse over dirty dishes in the sink, that should be gone right within 2 minutes. Like as soon as that fight's over, you should be like, whatever, like that was a stupid fight. But if you don't sleep well, and we think this is one of the things going on with PTSD, you don't emotionally categorize things well. And so now that can be like this major stimulus. So something that's relatively benign, could be a big deal all of a sudden. And then I'll back up a little bit more. When I said it takes 8 hours to repair, if I choose to sleep only 6 hours, like I said, I'm choosing to age 25% faster. I've chosen not to prepare 25% of the way, right? But tomorrow's still going to come at exactly the same time. And I'm still going to have to do everything that I had to do if I slept 8 hours or 6. So if I haven't repaired, or if I haven't repaired and prepared 100%, I've only done 75% of that. How do you think I get through the next day? How do I compensate? I release more stress hormones. Stress hormones are more catabolic, but if you think about it, how do you feel when you're in fight or flight? You're really energetic. You're really alert, right? You're really capable. So you don't need to go that far, but you just raise your stress hormones a little bit, and that will make you feel more amped up and less tired. But like I said, it's more catabolic. You're using your body as a fuel. And really importantly, stress hormones. So most people think of cortisol. We can just say cortisol, but it's cortisol, epinephrine, norepinephrine. And norepinephrine is adrenaline for the brain, and epinephrine is adrenaline for the body. So those are going to increase when I don't get enough sleep, because my body's going to increase all of my stress hormones. And norepinephrine and cortisol impair the prefrontal cortex. Our prefrontal cortex is the area of our brain that allows us to consider without actually doing them. We're the only animal we know of that can do that, right? That we can say, there's 5 different possibilities here. Which one should I do? And you can kind of go, well, if I do that, that's the most likely. So that simulation ability is critical to our, like we call that executive functioning. And if you think about an executive running a company, that's kind of all the things. But the other thing that's really important about the prefrontal cortex, it's how we communicate with each other. And as I said, the only time any animal on the planet sleep deprives itself other than us is an animal that's being stalked or an animal that is starving to death. Either way, they're under threat, right? They're under threat of extinction, right? They could possibly die. And when you're under threat, you think differently and you behave differently and you perceive differently. And so when you're under stress, you're more likely to consider anybody else a threat, right? And we've tested this, and we know this. This is one of the things that we know happens with combat veterans. When they come back, you can show them pictures of people and say, do you think this person's like neutral, happy, threatening, whatever? And you show people that when they're sleep deprived, when they're not sleep deprived, they'll think that the people are more threatening. Like everybody's more threatening. Everybody's less friendly. And so how we perceive other people's communication has a lot to to do with how we perceive them. If we think their face is threatening, maybe malicious, maybe underhanded, maybe conniving, like we don't really know what's going on with that person. And it takes like, a tenth of a millimeter of a change in their eye angle for us to go, what was that? Like, I wonder, right? And so we're more suspicious and we're less good. If that's right, we're less good at communication. And so there was a study called it was called the couples trial, and they took long-term couples. I think they were all married, but if not, they've been together multiple years, monogamous couples, and they had them volunteer for this research, and they said, hey, tomorrow we're going to take care of 100% of your concerns. Like if you need doggy daycare, we're going to do that. Like we're going to mow your lawn, whatever needs to happen, we're going to take care of it. We're going to give you money for you and your spouse to go spend the whole day doing whatever you want to do. Go have a great time. And then all we ask of you is that you come back to the lab afterwards, and we're going to ask you all some questions. And so when they do this, they bring them back, they separate them and put them in different rooms so that they can freely talk trash about each other. And they say, how do you think your partner was today? Was your partner fun, was friendly, connected, communicative, like energetic? What did you think? So they do this, and then, at the last minute they throw in, but one of you is going to be deprived 2 hours of sleep tonight. So one person is going to get 6 hours in bed, one person's going to get 8 hours in bed. And that's the only condition for this thing. So they do that. And now it doesn't matter which one you've taken the sleep away from. They both think that the other one wasn't as good as they usually are. They didn't communicate as well. They weren't quite as connected. They didn't seem quite as loving, not quite as affectionate, not quite as articulate, didn't seem to listen quite as well. Everything that you think of and like how people communicate was worse. And so when we're by choice sleep depriving ourselves, not only are we aging faster and we aren't repairing, and we're changing our fuel partitioning, and we're making us more likely that we're going to be fat, we're decreasing our cognitive abilities, our problem solving, our simulation, like I talked about, our verbal fluency, our communication, our interpretation of other people's communication. We're really sacrificing every single thing that we value, right? Because it doesn't matter what your goals are. Any goal that you have, like any future that you can foresee that you hope is at least as pleasant or more pleasant than today, that it's a future that you have ambitions to work towards and motivation to work towards, it's going to involve all of those things, right? It's going to involve how healthy do you feel? How inflamed are you? How strong are you? How active are you? How much energy you have? How well do you communicate? Who's in your life? All of that matters. So it's when I first started doing my lectures, I used to say there's 4 pillars of health: sleep, nutrition, exercise, and stress mitigation. And now I say there's 3 pillars. There's exercise, nutrition, and stress mitigation. They sit on the foundation of sleep. Because if you don't sleep well, those other pillars can't be optimized, and not even close, in fact. So I talked about the nutrition. If you're not sleeping well, what your body does with the food that you eat tomorrow will be different, and it'll be less optimal. It won't be what you want. It won't be as much as what you want. How hungry you are will change. You will be hungrier. You will crave worse foods. That will require more willpower. Your willpower is in your prefrontal cortex, and that's depleted. So now you're going into it with a tired brain, trying to overcome with willpower, with less willpower. So nutrition still matters. And I would still say, don't just throw in the towel and eat donuts all day because you didn't sleep well. But your nutrition, the benefit of your nutrition is reduced 30 or 40% the next day. Your insulin sensitivity in several of your tissues drops by 30% just by not sleeping 2 hours, like sleeping 6 hours instead of 8 hours. We already talked about when I exercise, I don't get better when I exercise, right? I get worse when I exercise. I get weaker. My endurance is depleted. Like I'm not as capable after I exercise. I get better while I sleep. So if I don't sleep adequately, it doesn't make sense to exercise tomorrow. From yesterday, why am I going to go do it again today, right? If I haven't repaired from yesterday, it makes no sense to do more damage today because I can't stack it up. I can't I'm going to sleep 10 hours and it's going to be the same. It doesn't work like that way. You lost that opportunity. You can compensate a little bit, and we can get into that later. And then stress mitigation. So stress mitigation really, and that comes in many forms. That's mindfulness, that's prayer, that's meditation, that's progressive muscle relaxation, breath work, all sorts of things, right? Tai Chi, certain forms of yoga. There's all sorts of things you can do to lower your stress levels. Well, I just told you, if I wake up at 6 hours and get going on my day, my stress hormones are 25% higher. So if I do any stress mitigating technique, I have to drop it 25% just to be where I would have been if I would have slept 8 hours. And then if I want to lower it even more, like, right, that's a tall task. Most stress mitigation, you're talking about a 10 to 20% decrease in stress hormones throughout the day when you're really well practiced at things like that. And then the final insult to injury, I didn't really cover it at the beginning, but when you go to sleep, your stress hormones have to be at a certain level for you to be able to fall asleep. If I put you in a cave with artificial lighting and no sense of time, your circadian rhythm isn't exactly 24 hours. You would be off by about 15 to 20 minutes per day. And over the course of a couple of weeks, you would be off half a day, right? You'd be off by 8 hours or more. So the insult to injury is my stress hormones have to be at a certain level for me to fall asleep. So if I put you in a cave and I didn't do anything to wake you up, there was no alarm, there was no temperature change, there was no light, there was nothing to cause you to wake up, you would wake up. If you're really well sleep adapted, you would wake up at about 8 hours. If you're sleep deprived, like most people are, when we do those trials and we put people in a bunker or a cave or something, they sleep for about 12 and a half hours. And then over the course of about 3 to 4 weeks, they'll go down to sleeping 8 hours a night, no matter how long it's dark. And that's where that number comes from. That's how we know people need 8 hours to sleep. So your stress hormones have to be below that level, right? Because that level of stress hormones is going to wake you up at some point in the morning. So when you go to sleep, you have to be below that, right? Makes sense, because this is enough to wake you up. You can't go to sleep at that much. It has to be under that. Well, if I'm sleep deprived, my stress hormones are higher. And when my stress hormones are higher, the other thing that happens during the day, my prefrontal cortex isn't working as well. My prefrontal cortex is weighing and measuring my environment. It's trying to figure out if I'm on track or not. Am I moving towards the future that I want? Am I failing? Do I need to adjust? Well, under stress, everything's more negative. I'm more pessimistic. So I'm more likely to secrete more stress hormones and feel more stressed and actually produce more stress hormones just because I'm not perceiving my environment as well. But even if I don't do that, I'm still trying to go to bed with stress hormones that are 25% higher. And eventually what happens is you can't fall asleep because your stress hormones are so high. And then when you do finally fall asleep, it's out of sheer exhaustion. You get short sleep because your stress hormones are high enough to wake you up earlier. And now you can't sleep because your stress hormones are high, but your stress hormones are progressively getting higher because you aren't sleeping well. And that's what we call psychophysiologic insomnia, which means that you can't sleep because you're worried that you can't sleep. You're worried that you're not going to be able to sleep, so you can't sleep. That's the most common form of insomnia right there. And that's the most common performance killing thing in society is lack of sleep. So I just covered the 3 pillars, right? Your nutrition is off if you're not sleeping well. Your exercise is useless if you're not sleeping well. And your stress mitigation probably isn't even going to get you back down to your baseline. So really, sleep is the foundation. And if you're going to do any of those 4, that's the thing to focus on. Until your sleep is good, the other stuff is, I don't want to say superfluous. You still do the best you can with that stuff, but you can't come close to being optimized. If you're sleeping really well and your nutrition is spot on and your stress is really low, but you aren't exercising that much, you can still be pretty darn good, right? Like you can still do a lot of things really well. You take any one of those pillars and you take those off a little bit, it doesn't matter that much.
I think you helped me understand something about the different types of insomnia. So it sounds like when you can't fall asleep, you're actually maybe a little bit better off than when you just wake early, because when you wake early, you're just so exhausted that you pass out, but your stress hormones are high, versus when your stress hormones are high, you have a hard time falling asleep, but then eventually you step yourself down into sleep. So is that true? Like, would you say somebody that wakes early is kind of in a worse off state than somebody that has trouble initially falling asleep?
Like I said, elevated stress hormones are the most common cause of insomnia. When we break it down, there's initiation insomnia, there's maintenance insomnia, and terminal insomnia. So terminal insomnia just means like, whatever, I'm planning to sleep till 6 a.m. and I wake up at 4 or 4:30 and I just don't go back to sleep. I could lay in bed for 2 hours and nothing happens. I just get up. That's terminal. Maintenance insomnia, I fall asleep. Maybe I do 1 sleep cycle. I didn't really cover that, but when you go You go from stage 1 down to stage 4, deep sleep. Then you come up, you do REM, and then that ends. Your first sleep cycle is like 90% deep sleep and 10% REM sleep. So it's about 90 to 120 minutes long. And then you go into another sleep cycle, and it becomes progressively less deep sleep and progressively more REM sleep. So the morning hours are REM sleep. So if I lose 2 hours of sleep, I'm primarily losing REM sleep. If I go to bed at 2 o'clock in the morning, there's a good chance I've overstepped my deep sleep as well. I might get more REM sleep and less deep sleep, but either way, I'm going to be sleep deprived, right? And I'm not going to get good sleep. So the maintenance insomnia and initiation insomnia are usually elevated stress hormones. And there's a difference primarily between men and women, and these are generalizations. Of course, there's a blending of all of this, but by and large, men usually have maintenance insomnia, and females much more commonly, especially mothers, much more commonly have initiation insomnia. And there's several reasons we think that happens. One, of course, women are more about relationships and more about nurturing, more about caring for others. And so they're more selfless during the day, and they're less likely to think about their own stuff, their own concerns, their own problems. They're thinking about everybody else. And when they get in bed, that's kind of the first time of the day they really start thinking about themselves. And then they start worrying about everything that, anything they've possibly done in their whole life that could have damaged their kids 20 years from now or whatever. You're women, you know what I'm talking about. Like, I know how y'all think, and you really rev up at that time, and you're like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. And I have an 8-month-old, Dr. Parsley. So I can't wait for our listeners to jump into all of this.
You'll love this stat. When the first 2 years of your child's life, you will lose 6 months of sleep. So it's about 25% of the sleep in the first 2 years of their life. And you can mitigate around that, but it's tough to do as the mother. It's easier for the father because they're just not the primary nurturer. That's just the way evolution happened. But men, by and large, have about 30% more muscle mass than a woman. With comparable size. So like if you take a man whose frame is roughly your size, he'll have 30% more muscle. His brain will be about the same size. And the primary thing that causes what we call sleep pressure. So sleep pressure, we all have it every day. It's the drive to go to sleep. So lack of stress hormones allow us to fall asleep. But what pushes us to sleep, like if you've ever stayed up for 24 hours or 36 hours or 48 hours and you're just like, oh my God, I could sleep on a pile of cactus right now, I'm so tired. That's sleep pressure. And that's caused by what we call adenosine. And adenosine is a molecule. It's in every cell of your body. Every cell in your body uses a fuel source called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. It just means it's an adenosine molecule with 3 phosphates on it. And every time you take a phosphate off, it releases a burst of energy that your cells can use to do its work. So you go from ATP to ADP to AMP to just A, and you have adenosine. Like I said, being awake is catabolic. You're using your resources, and your adenosine that hasn't been able to restore itself to adenosine triphosphate, it's just staying as adenosine. The more adenosine that's in your brain, the more sleep pressure you have. Well, the more muscle mass you have, the more adenosine you're going to produce. So if you have higher adenosine, you have more sleep pressure. So even if your stress hormones are equally as high, you're going to be able to fall asleep, and you're going to go through that first deep sleep cycle. And when you go through that first deep sleep cycle, you're going to flush out all the waste products. You're going to start restoring the brain, and you're going to build up a bunch of ATP and get rid of a bunch of the adenosine. Now, if your stress hormones are high enough and you don't have the adenosine forcing you to be asleep, your stress hormones are high enough to wake you up, and you wake up and you can't go back to sleep. That's maintenance insomnia. So it almost always comes down to stress. And even if there's another physiologic cause for poor sleep, because somebody's not going to come to their doctor or healthcare provider or whatever, they're not going to come to them after a day or two. They're going to come to them after weeks or months, most likely months of poor sleep. So now they do have stress about sleeping. Now they actually have psychological worry, right? Now we need some sort of cognitive behavioral therapy on top of physiologic reduction of sleep, of stress. And I actually have actually have a worksheet that we could give your audience, and it's basically a 3 or 4 page worksheet. It's 4 pages that talks about how you get stress out of your sleep, and how do you remove stress from the sleep process, and what do you do when stress pops up when you're trying to sleep. And it's ridiculously simple. It's ridiculously simplistic. Practicing it isn't as easy as the concept of it.
You can download the free worksheet at docparsley.com/Sophia Health.
And in my experience, it takes about 4 to 6 weeks for people to really, like, you can learn it in a few hours and you can do it tonight. But as far as like the full impact of it, it happens when your realization of what's going on shifts. So it's like your actual thoughts shift around it. And then all of those, like all those routines and procedures that you're doing to get the good sleep, that will like really kick in, and once you get it, you never lose it. It's like, it's like whatever. It's learning to ride a bike. Like once it clicks in, you're like, okay, now I get it. Now I understand how this works. And then you'll have it forever. And it's honestly, like I charge a lot of money for people to be my clients. I do all sorts of things, anything you've ever heard of to enhance performance. I work with that. And the most powerful thing I do is this silly little worksheet.
Is sleep. Can you teach an 8-month to sleep? I'm just kidding.
Well, I'm curious, if you add more muscle.
The 8-month-old isn't the one that needs sleep coaching.
Yeah.
It's you and your husband.
That's right.
If you add more muscle, will that help you sleep better?
It does.
Okay.
So anything anabolic, like you've probably heard of a lot of people say when they start exercising, they sleep a lot better. One of those reasons is, as you talk about, you gain lean tissue, you lose adipose or fat tissue. Just that ratio is better, and you'll have more adenosine, you'll have more sleep pressure. If your stress hormones are high enough, you might just then have maintenance insomnia instead of initiation insomnia. But whatever, we take what we can get. Like, we make small changes along the way. But also when you exercise intensely enough, and I don't recommend this unless you're in really good shape. Like you don't want to go do CrossFit or 30 minutes of jujitsu or something, like, tons of wind sprints or something. Like, you don't do that until you're really fit. But when you do really intense intervals like that, that's the only other time you can secrete anabolic hormones. So you'll produce more testosterone and more growth hormone during those periods. And that helps you sleep better as well. So when I was in the SEAL teams and, we got everybody off of Ambien, we documented an almost 1-to-1 correlation, which would then be causal, but it was 0.87 to 1. So a 0.87 correlation between total testosterone levels and total sleep. So if you took away sleep, testosterone went down. If testosterone was down, sleep was down. If you increased testosterone, sleep increased. And a caveat that I'd like to mention to you and your audience is that testosterone is the primary sex hormone for men. Everybody knows that. What most people don't know is that it's also the primary sex hormone for women. Women have 10 times more testosterone than they do estrogen. Just men have 10 times more testosterone than women. So we think of it as a male hormone, but it's the primary sex hormone for women. It's the primary anabolic hormone. And like I said, growth hormone and testosterone are the primary anabolic hormones. Insulin and thyroid actually play into that as well. And all of those are regulated during deep sleep. So if your quality of sleep isn't great, something that we talked about earlier, like the alcohol decreases deep sleep by 80%. So even if you're in bed for 8 hours and you think you slept well, you lost probably 80% of your deep sleep, which means you lost 80% of your hormone regulation as well.
Dr. Parsley, you mentioned something earlier, and I wanted to circle back to this, but you mentioned when you took away the Ambien from the SEAL team, you also said, go get these supplements to help them get better. Can we talk about the supplements for a minute? Because I know you also have Doc Parsley's Sleep Remedy sleep supplement. So,
yeah. So actually, that's it's another one of those life things that was thrust upon me. So I never planned to be the sleep guy, and I definitely never planned on having a supplement. But yeah, what happened is, like I said, I was no expert on sleep when any of this started. I did have the advantage of being the doctor for the West Coast SEAL teams, and the SEALs had a pretty good public image and reputation by that time. And so I could call anybody and say, like, I saw your TED talk, I read your book, I heard your lecture, whatever. And I'm the doctor for the West Coast SEAL teams. Can I consult with you? Could I come train with you? So I got to learn a lot really quickly. But when it came to helping people sleep, I was really on my own, and it was I just studied the physiology of sleeping. It's like, okay, well, what makes you sleep? So there's only three things that make you sleep. Apart from the adenosine sleep pressure that we're talking about, like there's three things that have to happen for you to be able to fall asleep. So one we know is blue light. Most people are aware of that by now. Blue light, almost certainly because the sky's blue. When we evolved to be on this planet, and when the sun went down, we're terrible predators, period, unless we have weapons that we've made. But we can't see very well at night. It's pretty dangerous for us to be out at night. And so, like most animals, you play to your strengths. And so we sleep during the nighttime when we can't see very well. So when the sun goes down, the blue light, we have nerve cells in the back of our eyes that they register blue light. They have nothing to do with vision. So blind people can have completely normal circadian rhythms because of these neurons in the back of the eyes. And so when you sense the blue light is gone away, that stimulates this long pathway in your brain. Most people have heard of it. No need to go into detail, but eventually it leads to the production of the hormone melatonin. And melatonin doesn't make you fall asleep. Melatonin is the initiator of all of the cascades that lead to you sleeping. So your brain changes in 100 ways, and it's changing, and all of those sleep cycles. So like your brain chemistry is drastically different during all of those, and different regions of your brains are more active. And it is a symphony. I mean, your brain is more active while you're asleep than it is when you're awake. But it's just active in different ways. And so all of these things are changing. Your brain chemistry is changing. Once melatonin kind of makes things change a lot, something that gets produced is a neuropeptide called GABA. And GABA stands for gamma aminobutyric acid. I don't know why you'd care about that. I don't know why I said it, but I did. And that molecule slows down the neocortex. So the part of your brain that we think of when we think of the human brain, that kind of crescent shape with all the wrinkles and crevices in it, that's the neocortex. Underneath that, we call the lizard brain or midbrain. That's like our primal brain, which we can survive with, right? And then there's a brain stem underneath that. And the neocortex is how we interact with the world. That's our motor, that's our sensory, that's our interpretation, our memory, and our processing of what we think all of that means, and our thoughts. And like I said, that part of our brain has to slow down, because there has to be a barrier between us and our environment. And so GABA slows that region of our brain down. And what I mean by slow it down is like your nerves, the neurons in your brain have an electrical charge, and they kind of work like a capacitor. So they have this charge in them, and then something happens, like some chemical signal comes to that, and it changes that charge enough for that neuron to fire. And when that neuron fires, it communicates with other neurons. And so what GABA does is it lowers that potential. So it makes it harder for all those neurons to fire. And that's why you can overcome it by shaking somebody or making a loud noise or turning on a really bright light or something. But that neocortex slowing down is a very important part. So most people have had the experience of like waking up in the morning, got a bad night's sleep, didn't sleep enough, went to bed too late, whatever, and you're exhausted, but you have to get up and you have to go do something. You have to get up and go to work. And then you get up and you go to work, and you're like telling yourself all the way to work, I'm going home, I'm going to sleep. As soon as work's over, I'm going to climb bed. I'm going to sleep for like 14 hours. I'm going to catch up. And then one of your friends talks you into going to happy hour, and you go have a couple of drinks. And then all of a sudden you don't feel tired anymore. Well, what happened? Like, you're drinking a CNS depressant. You should be more tired. What's happening is that you've just overcome the GABA effect, right? So your brain's trying to slow itself down and say, let's get ready for sleep. And you're not having any of it. So you stimulate yourself enough, you can get past that. And then the other thing that happens when the sun goes down, melatonin is produced, then GABA slows down our brain. And because there was no HVAC systems when we evolved, your body temperature went down. So those are the three cues for going to sleep: lower body temperature, slower neocortex, and the blue light going out of your eyes, which stimulated all those processes to change. So all of sleep hygiene is those three things, right? So millions of variations of how people tell you to deal with those. But that's what needs to happen for you to fall asleep. So all I did with my supplement was say, all right, what in that pathway could be deficient, right? So GABA, I said, right, you could produce not enough GABA. So I give you a little GABA. Melatonin could be low. So I give you a little melatonin, but I give a very, very small amount of melatonin because it's a hormone. And if you give too much of a hormone, then your body quits responding to that hormone. So it's just enough to initiate. Again, like it only lasts a couple of hours. And then everything that you need to produce melatonin. So you all heard of the Thanksgiving tryptophan coma everybody talks about, right? Turkey has tryptophan and amino acid in it. All protein, all meat does. Just we tend to overeat turkey more. The carbs have a lot to do with the two, but so tryptophan becomes 5-hydroxytryptophan. And then with the help of vitamin D3 and magnesium, 5-hydroxytryptophan becomes serotonin. Serotonin becomes melatonin. Melatonin starts a bunch of cascades, produces GABA. And then there's an amino acid called L-theanine that helps GABA do its work. It helps GABA be more efficient and enhances the effects of GABA. And that's what's in my products. So tryptophan, 5-hydroxytryptophan, vitamin D3, magnesium, a tiny bit of melatonin, some GABA. And then I added just a few years ago, some new research has been coming out about a supplement which you get from meats called phosphatidylserine, and phosphatidylserine lowers overall stress hormones. It lowers cortisol levels. So I gave these guys a handout and they went and bought all this stuff, but they were buying, some stuff was a liquid and this was a powder and these were capsules and this came in 90 days and that came in 30 days. And so they just continually harangued me after I got out of the Navy and I was in private practice, and they just kept calling me going, dude, just make a product out of this. Like, we can't travel with it. It was pre-Amazon, so they're driving to all the health food stores and trying to get the products. And so I just combined it all into a product and said, I'm going to put this in a product and then I'm going to sell it to the SOCOM and I'm going to just go back to private practice. And that was just almost 10 years ago. And I'm still, I still don't have a contract with SOCOM, but I'm still selling the product. And yeah, I think is the best product on the market. And I don't say that as a sales technique or braggadocious. Just if I could make it better, I would. And if new research comes out, something that I could add that would make it better, I'll add it. So I just try to make it a very complete product. And like I said, it's just a nutritional supplement. I use that word literally in my practice. So there's ideal. With all the metrics we have now, we can measure genetics and epigenetics, and all of your I can measure your microbiome. I can measure your gut biome. I can measure metabolites. I can measure your hormones and like everything in your body. I can assess the hell out of you and say this. I think this is the ideal way for you to live. Now, I won't be right, but I can be pretty close. But then there's reality, like you have a life, you have responsibilities, you have things to do, you have kids, and so in between there, we supplement, right? And that could be, nutritional supplements. So that could be supplemental activities. That could be gadgets that we wear to help us learn how to meditate better, whatever, that measure our heart rate, that, we do things to supplement in between there, trying to get as close to that ideal as possible.
Riley, I know what I'm getting you for Christmas, a little supplement in your stocking.
Yeah, that's incredible. And it's really good to hear and so it's safe to take the melatonin. I've always been, as a pilot and everything else, I've always been away from anything, like I mentioned with my Ambien testing around 2008, right. I would never touch anything again. But that's okay.
Yeah. So from the time the sun goes down, if you didn't have any artificial lighting in your life, from the time the sun goes down until you wake up in the morning, your brain would produce about 6 micrograms of melatonin. My product has 2 micrograms in it. And of course, you don't absorb 100% of it. So you're probably getting like a microgram to your brain. And then all the other nutrients in there, because I'm trying to make that cascade continue. So there's really nothing in my product that's going to last more than a couple of hours. So you take that, the phosphatidylserine will probably keep your cortisol low for maybe 6 hours or 8 hours, but everything else in that product is going to be metabolized or in your bladder within about 3 hours of taking it. So there's nothing in there. And again, there's no tricks in it. It's not like, Ambien, or benzodiazepines, those are what we call GABA analogs. And that's the pharmaceutical industry right there. So they figure out a pathway that has an effect. And I told you, GABA slows down the neocortex, right? Well, if you make super GABA, right, benzodiazepine, that molecule looks a lot like GABA and it binds to the GABA receptor, but then it has 100 times the effect that GABA does. And so it's better at making you sleep, right? And then Z drugs come along and has 1,000 times the effect of GABA. And what that does is completely dissociate your brain to the point where you can sit up and watch television and play video games and email and talk to people and have zero memory of it because your neocortex was dissociated from your lizard brain. And that's how they got sued, because people were taking this drug, completely dissociating their neocortex, and they're working off of their lizard brain, which is the 4 Fs. It's fighting, fleeing, fornicating, and feeding. And that's all you want. That's all the lizard brain does. It keeps you alive. And so people were taking this and like going and picking up prostitutes, or taking this and going to all you can eat buffets, or taking this and going eating all the snack food in the house. And the worst case is people that lived in areas where gambling was legal. And this is how it really initiated. People were going to casinos and gambling away their life savings while they were on this drug, and coming home and getting back in bed and waking up the next day with no memory of it whatsoever, and finding out all of a sudden they're bankrupt. And people are getting arrested for soliciting prostitution, and people are getting in driving accidents and stuff, and all kinds of things, because it just dissociated your brain. So there's a point where you don't want that pharmacological trick going on, and there's no trick in my product. Just like if any of those things are low when you should be going to sleep, because those, from the time the sun goes down until the time you actually feel like sleeping, is about 3 hours of transition. And most people don't do that, right? Like 99.9% of society doesn't do that anymore. So what we're trying to do is kind of super concentrate things in your brain as if you had spent 3 hours getting ready for bed. And then hopefully all those cascades continue and you sleep a lot better. But there's nothing in there that's going to make you sleep. If you have some kind of real sleep disorder and you take this, it's not going to magically make you sleep. It might improve your sleep mildly, but it's mainly meant for people, who are doing most things right. Like if you ignore sleep hygiene, and you ignore all the stuff you're supposed to be doing, there's no magic in it. I could take it right now and I won't feel it. It won't make any difference to me whatsoever, because I'm not ready to go to sleep, and I'm not trying to go to sleep. Yeah. So there's nothing to worry about in there. And the melatonin in there, like I said, is concerning. Melatonin being in supplement form is concerning because it's really easily abused. I've seen 50 milligram melatonin pills and things like GNC. And like I said, your brain produces 6 micrograms in about 12 hours or 9 hours or something around those. But your gut's also producing GABA, and you're using it for melatonin, and there's other ways you're getting melatonin.
Well, Dr. Parsley, thank you so much for being here and sharing all of these insights on the sleep architecture, to supplements, to what we need to do to get a better night's sleep. I think we'll all kind of use it and appreciate it. I mean, like you said, the whole country is in a sleep deprivation. But yes. A question that we ask all guests on the show is, and we already know your answer, but can you share 3 fundamental pillars that contribute to your well-being?
Yeah. If I can think of 3. I think I'd put sleep in there.
Yeah.
A little bit different. I think that probably the stress mitigation, the most effective way I see that happen is with community. And like I said, I work with private clients. I work with former special forces guys when they get out. I work with them for about a year to kind of help them get back, repair from all the damage of those type of careers. So like I said, sleep obviously is the foundational thing that I would say for anybody. And then I would say the sense of community, and whether that's a religious community or friends and family or whatever it is, but like that sense of community is not only the best stress mitigator, but there's other benefits to that, that go beyond the simple stuff that we've talked about tonight. And then I would throw actually nutrition in there, over exercise. I think it's important to be active in your life, but I'm not really sure exercise is super important unless you're working towards a goal. And I distinguish the two between like exercise is the expressly doing an activity to get better at that activity, whereas activity is just staying healthy, right? Like mowing your own lawn and washing your own car and walking, taking the stairs instead of the elevator. And, that's activity in my mind, going on walks and things. And, so that'd be it. Sleep, community, and activity.
Great. And where can our listeners connect with you, or how do they find more information?
That's a great question. I should probably know that. So my website, docparsley.com. And then I'm on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. And I know you can find me by my name, but sometimes it's Kirk Parsley and sometimes it's Doc Parsley. So I don't know. Maybe you can put that in the show notes.
We'll put it in the show notes.
Okay.
We'll definitely put it in the show notes. And for the supplements, you can find them at docparsley.com/get-sleep-now. If you want to take a look at those supplements we were talking about earlier as well. Well, Doc Parsley, thank you so much.
And we'll do that. We'll do that stress-free workbook with your audience. So just do the docparsley.com / you say it, whatever it is.
Yep. Sophia Health. Yep. And all this will be linked into the show notes. But thank you so much for your time. This was such a valuable session. Michelle and I are obsessed with, how do we optimize our sleep? And now I'm taking that to the next level. How do we actually optimize our performance? And it all starts with sleep. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for listening. This has been Sophia Unfiltered, a podcast by Sophia Health, the #1 marketplace for health and wellness. Find services, classes, and products from the top health and wellness providers. Book an appointment or join live classes now. I'm your host, Riley Reese. If this episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear about it in the comments section of your favorite podcast provider or with a 5-star rating. Let us know what your biggest takeaway from this episode was, or share it with someone you hope to inspire. Join us again next time for more real conversations, stories, and insights that help empower you with the knowledge and inspiration needed to transform how we care for ourselves.